Hello guys, welcome to my humble YouTube channel where I bring you fanfiction that will brighten your days. Before we start, a subscribe is greatly appreciated, and don't forget to leave a like and ring the bell icon so you won't miss exciting new fanfiction stories. The Saint of War, Tensura x DxD, by Kischur Chapter 14. It has been a few hours since Gabriel's siege on Asgard, with her powers now growing exponentially high to the point of no longer being seen as the same Gabriel a few hours before the siege. With her defeating and humiliating the bastard that has corrupted her precious son, by destroying his clothing and leaving him hanging on display for all to see and hear, did she finally felt content of the sinner's punishment, and a few greetings with Odin did she finally left the golden capital of the Norse pantheon. Flying back to heaven, she quickly noticed that something has changed. "Where's the angels that are stationed in this sector?" she asked, noticing the lack of presence from the angels that normally defending this sector itself. The more and more she went into the territory of angels, she noticed the more and more lack of angels in the areas that needed to be defended. "What's going on? Is this Michael's doing?" she asked herself, not knowing what to do, and so she did the next best thing. She unleashed all of her wings and her power and speed, and then accelerated herself at top speed to reach back to heaven as quickly as possible to question her brother about this action of removing the angels from the defended sectors of their territory. But when she entered into heaven, what she saw was something that she didn't expect she would see in her entire life. Standing all around her, the angels of heaven and the souls of heaven itself. All stationed, either flying or standing on a platform, all of them whom knelt down before the great tree of wisdom and the great tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and all around it is the remaining archangels that remained on heaven, well except for her who just returned back to heaven, with her also seeing her own son kneeling down before both the tree. No, he was kneeling down in front of a familiar golden-haired man. And upon seeing the man, Gabriel could only feel immense sadness, happiness and confusion at seeing the man. "Father," she thought, completely confused and out of the loop she currently is. A few hours before Gabriel returned to heaven, God, Elohim, has now decided to go to the sixth heaven, with him also being guarded and followed by both Raphael and Ciel, with them walking straight to Michael, the current leader of heaven. But, as they continued to walk towards Michael's office, Elohim became curious at the lack of his sons and daughters or the sixth floor of heaven, causing him to question the two behind. "Where are the other angels in this floor? It is like it is abandoned. Why is that?" he asked, wanting to know what is happening in the current state of affairs in heaven. Since he didn't know what was happening, with the sole exception of Earth, human world, he knew nothing about what is going on. "Because of your death, Father, we were forced to limit the people that truly knew of your condition, and the best way to do that is to forbid other angels into going into the sixth heaven with the sole exception of the archangels, and as that were given special privileges, in doing so, it made us hope that news of your death wouldn't somehow spread to the human world and spread across the supernatural world." Elohim hearing that could only nod in understanding, since after all, one of the reasons why no one even tried to attack heaven is because of himself, originally in his prime age, before his main body. Father, fought and sealed the Trihexa. His strength was said to be only weaker than the dragon gods themselves. But now, he has greatly been weakened with the loss of his two other parts, making be 1/8 of his power when he was back at his prime, for he wasn't a combatant like his other parts, he was a permanent administrator itself, with him being the very system that protects the world, creates, supports heroes and governs the miracles of the world. He wasn't a fighter, but an administrator that supports the world, and in times of war, that support also extends to the angels themselves as well. It's because of that, he has already decided to not enter the war in a physical form, but act in a way that would support his children, for his lack of combat knowledge and skills just makes him a liability to his children when the war starts. "I see, that's good, it might because of that. I haven't lost that much power all things considered," he commented, praising their actions, but still felt like something was missing in the whole process as well, since after all, he was still losing faith and power over the years since the death of his two aspects, which he has already expected and have even plans for, but he was still baffled at the level of faith he was losing every year despite the archangels doing their best to halt the losses of faith. Ciel, who noticed his confusion in the face that Raphael made, quickly came to the conclusion on what he was thinking and answered him. "The reason why Christianity is losing a lot of their faith in your power, grandfather, is because of the band of others of entering the sixth heaven," he answered, with him having some difficulty of addressing the Lord himself as his own grandfather. Elohim, hearing his words, was pleased, not because of him answering his confusion, but because of him calling him his own grandfather, much like he has always wanted. Tell me more, Seal. Right. Because of humanity is far too easily manipulated and doubtful, it created an unintended effect on the various people that knew of the supernatural that follows the church, when the ban of everyone in the entry of the sixth heaven, other than the archangels themselves and a select few individuals. It created a rumor that you yourself was either dead or sealed, making their faith in you waver, and as a result of you no longer going about and doing public reveals. The mortals no longer worship me? Is that it, Seal? Yes. Elohim, who heard of his answer, only nodded in agreement. With him always monitoring the human world, he was able to notice all of this, but didn't know the cost of it is, because he was always unaware of the supernatural side of the world, only knowing it because of himself and the occasional battles that happened in the human world. But now realizing this, he couldn't help but just sigh. We need to hurry up to save our beloved faction. You two, let's go. Right. With that, they marched onwards towards the office of Michael. Michael was having a field day in his office, with the numerous reports that he was getting from his various projects and work was overwhelming him, especially the reports in the army. It was only thanks to the other archangels doing the bulk of the work in their respective departments that he could even live to tell the tale of his epic battle of epic battles. With the need to raise armies, he needed to expend the already stretching funds and resources of heaven itself, in not just arming his forces but in not just armor, but food and water as well, and investing in things like defensive structures and the likes. With the use of magic by their side, the angels and the rest could very easily create the most elaborate defensive structure in all of the world itself. With it just being heavily enhanced with magic and the runes, but such things needs time to be created, especially if it needs to be at their apex of potential power, and above all else, a power source is also needed, which is where the majority of the budget is went into. Secure a power source to be able to make the magical defenses and barriers to be remaining active in a times of war where every available manpower is needed. But of course, securing such a thing is quite the costly endeavor. Simply because of how expensive the materials are needed, and the immensely difficult crafting processes required to be created, even for the Heaven faction, it is a costly and difficult endeavor, and so they have just went to their close allies the Norse to create them for their own defenses, of course with them fully paying the full price, not wanting to belittle the materials and the skills on creating such intricate machines. But still the thing that he was getting the most headache on was the equipment for the exorcist, since after all, the creation of the basic holy armaments like the saber and handgun is quite easy on itself, especially the exorcist robes and the likes, but those kind of equipment can only be used for evil or dark-aligned beings like the devils and vampires. But in the face of gods, humans and other supernatural creatures, this advantage to dark-aligned beings are nulled, and their abilities to fight equally powerful beings are seen as being pathetic and weak. In its creation, both the light sword and light gun was just seen as a way to kill devils and vampire kind, and with both races having such a great weakness to them, it is seen as a logical move not to try to enhance their capabilities but just enhance their ability to use light weaponry. Since after all, just a good strike with either weaponry could damage a high-ranking devil, vampire with ease, and as that could fight off ultimate class or higher-ranking devils are given holy swords and other armaments to help them fight off greater threats. And so, right now, in the first time in centuries since the last war, Heaven itself was crafting their own swords and weaponry that would not be effective against other beings, but rather just be extremely sharp and powerful. Which is progressingly nicely, since after all, the smiths of heaven isn't just resting around, they themselves are honing their craft for hundreds of years, even going to the Heavens Library to learn more and more blacksmithing skills to become better and have greater weaponry. Of course their weaponry and equipment is vastly inferior to those of Nordic dwarves, but considering their race is made for blacksmithing itself, and that their own equipment ranked about the top 3 greatest equipment in general, it is safe to say that they're not as great as does of their Nordic allies. But still, the constant need for metals and various other resources is destroying our coffers, Michael dreadfully thought. In truth, he was glad that the supernatural world has started to use human currency itself, with many of the supernaturals going about and establishing various companies that are controlled by their pantheon. It was a saving grace to their faction itself, since after all, the church has acquired a lot of money thanks to their investment and donation itself, something that Michael has started to use as well to power up his own faction. We need to create more specialized units. Maybe I should create another corps with Seal on the helm, with his strength and talent, and his own influence that has started to take hold in the church. we might be able to create a powerful force powerful enough to even dwarf off some of the bigger threats to the faction, he thought, wanting to capitalize on the power and potential of Seal Tempest. He knew of his accomplished abroad, since after all, they are quite telling and easily be able to acquire such information about him. With his beauty being the point of reference, they were to able acquire the most accurate information about him, causing the Archangels to realize what he has been doing, and that is by acquiring individuals to his side, training them to become stronger and better than before. Michael was even sure that they are learning from his unique art and cultivation method as well. It is something that Michael and the rest of the Archangels, sans Gabriel, hoped for. Seal being able to transfer his technique and cultivation method to other people, since after all, they knew of his obsession in perfecting everything. They knew he wouldn't go out of the library without perfecting both martial arts and his own cultivation method in the library, and with him now going to Norse, Pendragon, Americas, Hindu and Shinto, he would have learned a thing or two there, so he would have absorbed it and then would have tried to integrate it all into his own method and arts. Seal is our best chances of surviving this war relatively unscathed, and if he is successful, he would have. As he was thinking, he then stopped for he felt it. A sudden immensely powerful individual appeared in heaven without warning or foreboding. He just appeared like it was always meant to be there in the first place and just revealed their own presences in heaven. It was the energy sources that shook everyone and heaved to their very core, for the angels of old, they knew of this presences before, despite not having felt it for hundreds of years, they still knew of it, instinctively, they all knew it instinctively. They all just watched in awe and wonder, for in the highest peak of heaven itself, the seventh heaven, the home of God himself, they all saw it, a pillar of gold and rainbow, shooting back up to the stratosphere without mercy at all. It was a great sign that they all knew. God has returned. With that, various cheers then spread out in heaven itself, in celebration of God's return in the times that they needed him most. Seal. You? Michael, who saw and felt it all, couldn't help but just stand in awe at what he was seeing and feeling. For the first time in a long time, he finally saw a bright future ahead of them, a future that they might be able to survive in this great war that would happen. And when the pillar disappeared, and a few minutes later, the door opened once more, and the one that opened the door was his one and only father. Fat father, he couldn't help but say in confusion and anxiety at the being before him, not knowing if it was just a dream that he felt moments prior, or if this was reality of the matter and that his father has returned back from the dead. Elohim, who saw his second son, couldn't help but just let out an amused smile and then stretch his arms to the side, beckoning the angel for a hug. Are you old enough now that you don't need to give your old man a hug, Mike? Faster than sound itself, Michael bolted to the loving arms of his father. Dad, I missed you, he cried and cried at the arms of his father, who only embraced him and welcomed his tears onto his body. But he wasn't the only one that was currently happy at his return. Father, Dad, old man. The rest of the Archangels all came and rushing in, feeling his energy sources was in Michael's office and immediately rushed in without any sort of pause or manners to it, and originally, Elohim would have reprimanded them for it, but considering their own reasonings and emotions, he didn't and just outreached his arms for his sons and daughter to join the hug. You don't wanna? Without question or pause, all of them rushed in and joined the hug. With that, Elohim has returned, and his precious children has welcomed him back to their precious home. Seal, who saw all of this, just looked back towards Raphael and said, you can join too, you know. Foo. No. It's fine, I have my full back at seventh heaven, so I grant this to my siblings. And besides, I can spend it with you, she commented, coming a little closer to the boy, who only looked away and took a step away from her. After their sweet reunion, Elohim was now fully informed of the state of the faction that he was left with him being informed of their allies, potential enemies and other factions that are going about and after their blood in the near war. Elohim, who acquired all of this information and organized all of it, only nodded. So we're fucked, huh? He said their situation, with the rest only nodding at his words. It was the shortest words that he could use to describe their situation in summary. As a whole, as a faction participating in this war, they could be said to be one of the strongest, even without factoring in Seal and Elohim as well. They still have the superior quality of angels in their disposal, allowing them to fight off the numerous enemies that would coming towards them. In fact, even in the face of the gods of Greece and Egypt, they still held the ability to at least hold out, and need be, even using the various systems in place in heaven that would allow them to cross the power advantages of the gods of Greece and Egypt. But that's their war strategy, but as a faction, they were truly at their lowest, even with the new member of Seal Tempest and the revival of God. This point in time was still the darkest periods of their creation, simply because of how low faith is in humanity now, and with some of the church's father being corrupt that uses and abused their power over some of the sisters, nuns. Then their own funds and other resources, and finally the numbers of the angels that only numbers in the dozens of millions, instead of hundreds of millions like their counterparts are, and their own technological advantage is also slowly losing out as well, with the advancement of both devil and fallen angel tech rising up, both being spearheaded by their leader, Esajuka of the devils and Azazel of the fallen angels. With one last look at the reports, Elohim then made his first decision since his return. Very well, then, the bullmark of our rise back to the top would all be concentrated on Seal. He commented, with the rest all agreeing with him on that. They all knew of his quick rise, from that of a normal human to now being a high-tier saint that would match even as of the most powerful saints. His current strength is by far in the way, the strongest in the entire faction itself, far surpassed both Elohim and Gabriel in terms of power. And combined that with his sheer intellect and charisma as well, it was a safe bet to focus on his growth compared to others. Of course, Seal wouldn't be having any of it. I'm fine on being the focused, but I wouldn't be getting stronger by myself as well. I like the rest of you as well to get stronger so that the faction wouldn't be overwhelming if something were to happen to me, he said to the archangels, who only smiled. You don't need to worry about that, Seal, with Father with us. Even if he is weakened, we be able to train and reach our full capabilities. Hopefully by the time of the war starts at least, Michael commented confidently, since after all, he wasn't really that good at administrative tasks and was more like that of a general of an army. He was always meant to lead and command an army. He wasn't meant to be the king of heaven itself. It was actually Lucifer or Jesus that was meant to take the crown as king if ever God dies, but the former rebelled and the latter died in the previous war. And with none of the other archangels wanting any of it, he was forced to take the mantle of king for a while. Of course the other archangels still held their office of power, with them being in charge of their departments, occasionally helping and acquiring some of the work that Michael held, since after all, he is still the general of the entire army of heaven itself, and no one would take it from him, especially with how disarray everything is with the fall of God. Elohim also nodded at his son's words. As much as I hate it, I should be taking a bulk of my children's work, since I'm still healing and that most of my power is tied to the holy system itself, since of my own identity as the Holy Spirit of the Triune God. He spoke with the others, just being glad that they would be relieved of some of their heavy duties, much to Elohim annoyance. Seal, who saw all of this, only nodded, pleased with their own resolve upon seeing their faces, and then looked back towards Elohim. Then what must I do? Quote. With that, he then looked towards Michael. Do you still have the waters of the Holy Grail? Michael, who heard it, and with him knowing of Ciel's future and seeing all of this play out, he knew that he would need it eventually, and was just glad that he didn't trade it away to the Anatism mythology. Yes, Father, we still have it. Let's do this. Call back the angels that is spread across our territories, for the ritual of the new Jesus Christ shall now begin. Quote. Mythology is about two terms. In the human world it is about the stories of old existing in the same place, creating an unique world of their own with their own history and lore behind them. But in the supernatural world, mythology is about the group of faction that make up said group. With the factions themselves being HTE subgroup. The most famous of this mythology is the biblical mythology, with them only having 3 factions, and in terms this factions held capabilities to take on even a whole mythology depending on the individuals, something that only the Hindu pantheon only held claim to, and one of the main reason why the biblical mythology is still very much feared and respected to this day. And it is also why they also feared heaven the most as well. Despite viewing them as the easiest to fight and defeat. Despite their soldiers being immensely more better and disciplined compared to their counterparts and arch-enemies, because of their relatively lower numbers compared to the 2 factions, now it all has changed, with the advent of an immensely powerful human named Seal Tempest raising through the ranks and attaining the rank of Saint. A rank that has ever only achieved by less than 100 humans has ever achieved before even becoming 10 years old. His talent frightened everyone in the supernatural, especially when he came back from both India and Japan. two of the most developed places in the art of combat and cultivation, with India especially being the most developed of them all, unsurpassed in the entire supernatural world. Just thinking of such a genius acquiring their knowledge and applicating it himself, scared many of them to their very core. It's why many tried to kill in his journey towards Japan, wanting to eliminate the threat that was Seal Tempest, but unfortunately for them, however, all of them were annihilated, destroyed without anything left to remain. His power and reputation is already being shown throughout the world, and various potential factions that would go in war with them is already making plans to counteract Ciel's immense power and potential. It only made sense for Elohim, who knew of his greatest card must be more powerful than any plan could anticipate. Especially, since with him coming back, the rest of the archangels could go back and train to become stronger than before, especially Michael, who held the greatest potential among the current present archangels, with him having the potential to reach the cherub stage as well or even the seraphim stages as well if he tried hard enough for a few hundred or thousands of years. But right now, all current archangels are does that have the potential to reach the cherub class, a class that is far more powerful than any super devil or angel that exists in today's age. But of course, they still need to reach the peak of super angelhood to do it though, something that Michael was able to do quite easily in a few days of intense training. But for Ciel, right now, in order for him to receive a significant power boost, he needs to undergo a ritual that solidify his position as the new son of heaven itself, which would purify his already pure holy energy even further into perfection itself, which then strengthen his body and soul further as well, acquiring a boost in strength that he wouldn't normally acquire for himself. And so, with the orders from Elohim, Michael called back every angel back to heaven, to start the ritual ceremony for Ciel's ascension into that of an aspect of God, the new Son in the Holy Trinity of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit. It is not just a small ritual that just encompassed a group, and it isn't a ritual that encompassed the entire faction, and it isn't a ritual that encompassed the entire mythological faction. It is a ritual that encompassed the entire world itself. For the ritual of ascension isn't just to solidify Ciel's position in the faction and his own position in the Trinity itself, but to also send a message to all that is a part of the massive religion that is Christianity. A signal to all of them, a sign to come, that Jesus Christ has been reborn into this world, and consequently, their faith to the religion, even if fake and just doing it because of some third party, would rise to the apex, allowing heaven itself to experience a boost in faith and a boost of power as well, which now Elohim planned on giving it to the angels, not as a boost in power, but as a boost in talent and weakening of the evolutionary barrier that exists. It was a process that only Elohim knows the knowledge of, a fact that would make every mythological faction would want to kill heaven and capture Elohim to acquire said knowledge for himself. And here and now, in front of the tree of wisdom and the tree of knowledge about good and evil, Ciel knelt before him. Do you, Ciel, accept your position and responsibility as the new son of the Trinity? Quote. I, Ciel Tempest, graciously accept the position of the Son in the Trinity of Heaven and be happily a part of the Triune God. With that, Ciel glowed in golden and rainbow hue, with numerous golden markings and tattoos appearing in his whole body. With that, Elohim then grabbed the Holy Grail, with it having the holiest of all holy water, with it being bathed in the holy energy in the seventh heaven, allowing it to acquire additional effects that it normally didn't have. For instances, it always held the ability to heal all wounds, enhanced healing factors and enhanced physique, but after spending centuries in the seventh heaven, it has now evolved and acquired additional abilities. The purification of holy energy, the modification of the energy pathways to allow easier ways to manipulate and project mana itself, the ability to grant mystic eyes, and the ability to acquire divinity itself. This new additions was why the current Holy Grail water was the most valuable one of them all, since if consumed by an individual, they would acquire all of that and then some as well. But that wasn't all. Since Elohim wanted the boy to become the beacon for the new age, he decided to give him even more power, a power that would allow him to become a full-fledged high human much like his ancestors, but unlike them, he would attain an even higher pedestal and not be any other ordinary human. By acquiring both the fruits of wisdom and knowledge of good and evil, crushing them to become liquid, he then mixed into the waters of the Holy Grail, and normally this action would have resulted in both juices to become destroyed simply because it would be seen as unpurified and be purified to the point of it becoming normal water. But thanks to Elohim intervention and with him being the high and mighty of all holy energy and all things related to heaven, he was able to naturally intervene into this process and identified the new juice as not unpurified, but another form of holy water on the same level as that of the water of the Holy Grail itself. Something that caused it to not destroy it, but to harmonize with it, and after a few short minutes of glowing, it then rested into a state of calmness, before being offered to Seal. Drink this wine and you will acquire your position. Be ready to embrace your position and responsibilities like as of lifting up the world itself. Be fruitful, be proud, but most importantly, be humble and helped as in need, my dearest grandson Seal Tempest. Without hesitation, Seal grabbed the golden goblet and then drank it all, leaving nothing left in the desolate cup, and just like that he has assumed his role as the new son of the Trinity of Heaven. Bling. Asterisk. Bling. Asterisk. Bling. Asterisk. With that, his entire body was then engulfed in golden and rainbow hue of immense light and beauty, with the golden markings and tattoos in his body becoming more noticeable itself. His own appearance has also become even more beautiful itself. His soul impurities and the ones that his own grace couldn't remove was all but removed, allowing him to access the beauty that no other being in the existence of the universe itself has acquired for themselves. It was something that caused the numerous female angels of heaven to blush, with many of who even having their wings flashing black and white itself, and it was something that caused Elohim to look amusing at. But his physical appearance wasn't the only thing that changed. His own holy energies has been purified to the max, becoming so pure that his own previous state could be said to be dirty itself, along with his own body also becoming more and more powerful, with his energy becoming more easier to control and manipulate. And before long, after a few minutes after drinking said waters, Seal fully ascended into a new human, a form that all of humanity was supposed to acquire if not for the fact that Adam and Eve acquired the original sin. But even amongst the three only high human, Seal was different, thanks to the intervention of Elohim. His ranking in the race has changed. He was no longer just any old high human. He was now the primordial ancestor of the high human race. With him having the ability to conceive children that of high human race and not just any sort of human whatsoever. Watched yourself. All of you. For here and now, Heaven's strongest has now officially joined the fray. Elohim watched in excitement at the new dawn of his beloved faction would take into the future.